Welcome back, everyone, for the 5th episode of Closing Time with Pat and Denis. I didn't know if we'd keep going for 5 episodes. Pat, what did you think?
Wow, I didn't know if we could get there or not, but so far so good. And thanks for everybody for attending and hanging in there with us.
Yes, keep watching, keep listening. You are going to give us basically the opportunity to keep going, keep doing more advice and giving value to you all. So please keep listening and watching. Okay, so today what we're going to talk about is, let me look this up, how to enable a sales team and have a winning culture. So we're going to touch on, so this is linked to episode 3, where we talked about like productivity of a sales team, and the 2 topics of enablement and culture were key to that. So we're going to dive into both those topics today. So Pat, what do you think? Which one will we go for first?
Yeah, well, let's talk about both enablement and culture. And so I think that what I learned in doing, a number of B2B tech startups is that, you can come up with a bunch of awesome strategies, and you can have a bunch of really cool processes, and, you got the right people in there. But if you don't somehow enable them to be able to successfully execute, right? You don't mitigate and eliminate all those things are going to be the stumbling blocks for them to be able to do their job successfully. Then it all kind of goes for naught, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you can have really smart people and really good strategies, but if you can't somehow enable them to go out and execute, it's all going to be for naught. So
yeah, and you would have spent a lot of money wasted as well. With that.
The way it was put to me one time is it was, either vision or strategy without execution is imagination. Is the best way to think of it. So this is why we are going to focus now on this idea of enablement for execution and then culture, because culture does have a big part in, I'll say lifting people up to be able to do the execution in addition to the practical things. So, okay.
I would add to that as well as like retention of your staff with culture.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It has a really big influence on retention of your staff. So, so let's talk a little bit about enablement. So what I view, or what I learned enablement meant, and what it is that I thought that I needed to do with people when they were either coming into an organization, if we hired them, and or if we had some existing folks that we felt had the right, traits, or were a business athlete, but they just didn't have the skills or the knowledge to be successful in what we're doing. I kind of came up with these various things that I think are going to be considered. Now we're going to enable you, right? And get you empowered to go and do what you want to go do. So the first thing is this idea of training, right? And so training, in my mind, consists of you're going to be talking to them about, first and foremost, I would tell you, make sure you train them on who and what your potential customers look like. Right? Or buyers look like, right?
Yeah.
What is their role, and what is it that they care about, and why do they care about it, and things like that, right? So I would tell you to train people on that before you even train them on the product, literally, because that's how you get to a more custom. You're solving for the customer. You're not solving for your product, right?
It's the why, really. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. And then there's if need be, if you feel that you don't have enough, what I would call industry knowledge, meaning if your target, industry is, the utilities or whatever it happens to be, right? You're probably going to want to give them some knowledge around that, because that tells them a lot about, the operational things that you're trying to solve for, potentially, or not, as the case may be. And then you can go on, and even before that, I should say, I'm a little remiss, right? When you bring a new person into your company, you probably want to have some kind of onboarding training, because when they first get there, they got to kind of know, which way is which, and what is up and down, and where to go for this, and things like that. So that's another thing. And I think that we did a good job when you and I are at Tubular Labs. I think we did a good job, and Samina did a great job on onboarding people so that they kind of hit the ground running, as opposed to wandering around aimlessly and not knowing what to do.
Yeah.
Okay. And then the other thing, two other things in there, one being product. You do need to eventually train the product. And then specific to sales and marketing, to be perfectly honest with you, is this idea of you need to have a prescribed sales process and qualification methodology. Okay. And there are lots of different ones out there. There's, Hope Sound Strategy, there's, Medic, there's all sorts of different ones.
Yeah.
But it's really important that you have that. And there's various reasons for that. We'll get into that in a little bit, but that's the primary, I'll call it, areas that I learned that you need to ramp people up from a training perspective. So Denis, I'd be curious, you're living in the world of, having to hire on new people and get them up and running. And so what is your experience showing you in terms of training, and what is kind of, necessary, valuable, but, we can maybe, try to get that in at a later date, or we don't have the resources for it now, whatever it happens to be. So maybe you can share a little bit of your real world experience going on right now.
Yeah. So I was telling Pat before this episode, we just actually hired 3 new sellers at my current company, Precise TV. And we've spent a lot of time up front, first of all, making sure that we're finding the right candidates. And like to Pat's point about business athletes, definitely looking for people who will just be really good salespeople. And then I think one thing with enablement, or we talked about this in the last episode, was about like they're like those candidates that you hire, like knowledge based on knowledge, skills, traits, or experience. Mm-hmm. You really need to make sure that you're structuring your enablement around the areas that you think are most important. But to Pat's point, first of all, what we've done, we're actually having a boot camp week this week. So I sat in a boot camp and delivered a training yesterday. How we've structured that, there's actually an ex-person I worked with at Tubular Labs, Pete Storer, shout out for Pete. He's helping us kind of structure this. But he's kind of actually talking about like, he's a lot of experience in this. Like, how do you structure the training around their roles and responsibilities as they go selling? So like, there's no point in spending an awful lot of time with them early on when they come on to be like how to close a deal or how, all these things near the end of the process. It's more like, how do you kind of get them started, and how do they retain so much information that you don't overload them as well, and like make them less confident and stuff. Yeah. So I would say, with the one other tip, I would say with like, I think you should, if possible, have like a week or 3 days, 4 days where you kind of have an enablement week. Yeah. Ideally, you've more than just one seller, but maybe you just have one seller, but you still do this 2 or 3 days. Yeah. You should then have them maybe join the company a week or 2 before that week, ideally, or a month or so, just where they're not setting up their laptops and stuff, and you're trying to train them all this stuff, and they're not going to retain anything. So I think that's important. And then with the training piece, I would say like the customer and the buyer is very important. The industry, like, and with the industry, this was a session I did yesterday, but just like the ecosystem of like, why does the company exist, and create value in that ecosystem. I think that helps. And then, then making sure, we're going to touch on this in a minute about like coaching and professional development in a while, but as well, making sure with those individuals who join the business, none of them report to me in this example, but making sure that they're very aligned with their sales manager or their CRO, which is my position, in terms of like what we expect with them and their development over the first 3 months, 6 months. We did a lot of this part at Tubular, where there was like new operations people kind of owned it in terms of like, what does success look like, and what does not success look like.
Exactly. So it's really a way for you to measure the effectiveness of your various training programs. And like you said, you want to make sure that you're not like, I think you guys, in your example that you just described there, right? The onboarding stuff, you kind of tried to do that pre-showing up to the,
Ah,
to the company, right? Which is really smart. And
they're some of the best sellers you can find if they're like
exactly,
want to ramp before they start. But yes, continue.
exactly. And so when we talk about training, it's, one of the things that how you sequence these things, it's just that I've learned that they're going to all be sequenced differently depending on what the capabilities are of the sellers that you're bringing on, and or one of the capabilities of the people that you currently have if you're doing a pivot on your go-to-market strategy, right?
Yep.
So really important, but those are just the basics. And it's interesting how you guys are doing that with Pete. And yeah, you're right, shout out to Pete, he was great. He did a lot of that stuff with us at Tubular. So okay, so the next thing that goes into enablement, as you just mentioned, is this idea of coaching. And so there's lots of different ways that people can get coaching, right? There's things like, for example, I can get coaching from my direct manager, right? That where they're telling me, here's some of the things that I need you to improve on. Here's the things that, I would like to see more of because they're working for you, whatever that happens to be, right? There's this now with concepts, especially with Gong out there, is what I call self-coaching, right? You're going to sit there and you're going to sit in and you're going to listen to a video or an audio of the conversation that you had with a particular buying constituent and a customer of yours. And you're going to critique yourself and see how you did. Did you do a good job? Did you resonate with them? Did they understand what your value proposition was, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? Then there's what I call, team coaching, where you're kind of getting a collective, knowledge, infusion, or, kind of like, we're all kind of critiquing each other on how the process in general is working for us as it relates to, whether it's our sales process, buying process, whether it's how we're going about qualifying opportunities, whatever it is. So it's kind of a group type of coaching, for lack of a better word. And then what I would call peer-to-peer, which is this idea of you and someone else that's your peer, an associate of yours that you maybe have a high degree of regard for or respect for, whatever it happens to be, and then having them, help you out with, a particular strategy, or you're seeing this in the account. Have you experienced this before? And things like that. That is also an effective way to coach. Sometimes we call it shadowing, when we have people shadow somebody. When they're coming into the organization with one of our experienced sellers or marketing folks or demand folks or whoever it happens to be, that's a good example of the peer-to-peer type of coaching. So those are the different, what I've learned at least, are the different types of coaching that you can have in an organization. So I would ask you, Dennis, are there any others that you have found that have been effective for you? And or of those that I just described, which of those are you employing today that you're finding that are helpful for you?
Yeah, I would. I think the different elements of it, like team coaching, self-coaching, direct manager coaching, peer-to-peer, I think something that I found successful, if you need sellers to train sellers, like peer-to-peer, is like, how do you harvest a culture where that's happening all the time? Or for certain individuals in terms of professional development, I think identifying the one or two people who are like putting up their hands to want to be a leader or a manager in the future, this is like a great opportunity for them to dip their toe into this a bit more and prove that they have what it takes to be a manager and leader. So I think that's a good opportunity of this coaching piece to give some of those people an opportunity. And I think, I think a winning coaching, just in general, if you can get like development, personal development in terms of skills, to be an everyday process or part of your weekly sales meeting, like people learning from each other, is good. And back to your point, the last thing about what you said about Gong, I think there's another platform called Course and some others. They basically, and Zoom probably does it now as well, but they record video conferences with customers as a default. And I've had instances at Tubular Labs where like there were sellers having a drink on a Friday together, watching each other's calls like a live show and stuff, and critiquing and stuff, which is
Nice.
like amazing, going on to
Yeah,
that next level. So I
that's
think if you can
terrific.
get to a culture of that, like, yeah, it's amazing. So yeah,
It's always good when you inject fun in everyday life
yes,
because, as you know, in the world of selling, and sometimes there's lots of pressure to making sure that you're hitting your goals and objectives and
yeah,
things like that. But if you can inject some fun and some humor into the process, so that everybody, it's not this, oh my gosh, I got to sit here and critique myself, and it's okay because we all need to.
yeah,
None of us knows everything about everything, and
yeah, yeah,
as I
yeah,
used to say, I'm just
yeah,
trying to learn it all. I don't know it all.
yeah,
And so it's a good thing that you get the feedback as long as it's in a positive,
yeah,
context, right? You got to be careful about the acidic type stuff and
yeah.
the like. But
Yeah,
yeah,
and I'd add one last thing is like,
hmm
how do you get like the individual?
yeah,
If you have a team of sellers,
hmm
they're all going to be different individuals, and really as you're coaching, like
yeah,
understanding what makes them tick or not, or some sellers you might have to be more direct with, and upfront with, and but they,
hmm
they can take it, and it gets them going.
yeah,
Some will just need that confidence push, and so I think you really need to know the individual as well in terms of your coaching mechanisms. How do
yeah,
you get the most out of that individual, or team of individuals, by their personality, as well,
yeah.
is a big one.
Yeah, and I think it's a really good point, Dennis, because one size does not fit all when it comes to sellers, right? And I think in one of the episodes we talked about this, where I think one of the biggest mistakes I made early in my career when I was becoming a sales leader or a CRO was
Hiring
thinking, if I
paths.
just go out and hire a bunch of me and I'm going to be good, right? Yeah, that was a
Yeah.
disaster. So
Yeah.
you really do have to try to be aware of what are the motivations, or
Mm.
I'll call it inspirations more than motivations, because I believe motivation is a self thing as opposed to, but how you can inspire them to, assimilate these learnings and then use them and apply them to make themselves the best, he or she that they can possibly be in the selling role. And the other thing that I like that you just discussed, which is in the, I'll call it peer to peer or in the group type of thing, I used to characterize it when I was a CRO for many of the startups is like what I'm looking for in these types of coaching sessions. So if you've got people that are aspiring to be leaders, right? I used to say you've got this element of where you've got formal leadership and you have informal leadership, and that
Mm.
was the one thing that I was looking for with the coaching sessions, are who are the people that are really showing informal leadership, meaning they don't have direct
Yeah.
responsibility for these people, but they're showing leadership traits and they're helping them to develop to be better at their craft, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
That to me was a great early indicator in the coaching realm of how good they would be as a leader.
Yeah.
So,
And one add to that is like, we know this, but making sure others know it is like, your best salesperson might be a terrible manager or leader. And
yes.
it does,
Yeah.
sales is a bit different that way. Like, yeah. So just be aware.
It's almost at least I can say this, and what my experience was is whenever, if we ever started thinking about, especially in the startup world, if we ever started thinking about promoting our best seller into management, it was always that, ooh, I'm not, that's like, basically taking away the well for the water, so to speak, because now, and that's not to say you shouldn't try to help people develop in their career, but you have to develop along some other folks that can be, 80-20 rule, somewhere in that same vicinity of the ability to produce before you start thinking about developing them into being a manager, number one. And number two, there's a big difference between being a great seller and being a great manager. A great seller, it's all about them and their customers. A great leader and manager has nothing to do with them. It's all about the people that work for them and the customers. And there's a huge distinction. So you have to be able to decipher that when you're thinking about who to promote or not to promote, to your point, which is otherwise it can turn into it's bad for everybody. It's bad for the great seller and it's bad for the company.
Yeah. It can happen, but it's
It
just
does
something to be
happen.
wary of in
Very,
terms of
very.
like, well, but sometimes those people can be great leaders and
They
managers as
can.
well, but just be wary of it. Sometimes
Yes.
it's not as good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If they can make that transition from it's all about me and
Yes.
my customer to now it's not about it, it's
Yeah.
about everything else but me. Right?
Yeah. I remember you say to people if they said, I want to be a manager, and you'd be like, do you have kids? And they'd be like,
Yeah,
why?
yeah,
And they're like, well, it's like having kids. Yeah.
it is.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Okay.
Okay, so that's the coaching piece of it, and then the last part of enablement that I've learned that it needs to be somehow, some way in your organization is this idea of development or professional development, right? And how I distinguish that is that, for example, is there some kind of way that they can learn how to be a better, whether it's a better salesperson, be a better, if it's not sales related, how to be a better customer support person and how to be a better listener around, with your customers or things like that, right? It's kind of how do I develop to be the best, whatever my role is, and what are the skills or knowledge that maybe I don't have that I need to develop so that I can be, top 1% type of thing. So that's one thing in your current role. The second part of development that I've learned that a lot of people, so as they're going through their career and they're thinking, well, what's next for me, right? That's a very common thing these days, and probably at a shorter frequency than maybe it used to be because of, how fast the world works these days. But is this idea of how do I develop them about different or other functional disciplines in a company? And I'll give you a specific example that you all remember was when we were making the pivot from being a product-centric company to being more about how to business value and outcomes. And we were talking about, well, what is the, how do people justify it? Or, what is the, financial and or ROI considerations that are our ideal customer? How do they go about deciding whether they're going to use something like us or not, right? And I don't know if you guys remember this, but I said, I want you guys all to read this book that'll make this area of finance much more easy to understand. And it was something that I used when I was a seller.
Oh, yeah.
I was not an expert in finance, right? It was called Managing by the Numbers was the name of the book. And I said, read this and it'll help simplify when you're talking to them about, okay, well, how does this get what's the business justification or what's the hurdle rate or what's the whatever, right? So that's an example of, learning about other functions or other disciplines that you need to develop yourself. And then the last one, and this is a very common one, is leadership development. If you do decide you want to be in the world of leadership, because it's a very different discipline and role and, what's required of you as an individual. So you see a lot of, I'll call it leadership development type of programs out there for those who want to do that. So those are I'll call it the professional development things that I've noticed that are necessary for most of the companies, and especially in startups. Denis, let me ask you, do any of those resonate with you, or are you applying any of those, or give me your kind of what you think in your current role?
Oh yeah, very important. I think when I was at Google doing a manager training there at one point, it was like, how do you make sure that like your talent in your team is kind of like making sure they feel like they're progressing in their career and like being challenged enough. Like there was kind of like a top quartile where it was like, being challenged more and outside of their full comfort zone. So I think that's incredibly important. And I think we spend an awful lot of time hiring and making good hires and bad hires, it happens. Yeah. But with those good hires, making sure that you have a conversation with them if they report to you or one of your managers about what their aspirations and goals are over time, or you'll find out there's a bigger chance you'll lose them. So make sure that this is top of mind as well. I don't think it's like I think initially when someone comes on board, it's just like a 3 months, 6 months, fully ramped, 9 months, year. But then you need to make sure that there's even like that they're aware of opportunities or seeing other people progress, I think is very important as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I'll call it the structures or if there's, additional opportunities for people, that kind of is a way to keep them engaged, for lack of a better word, right?
Yeah.
And I've read several times, various articles or studies of why people decide to move on from their current, position. And pretty much, I would say about 80% of the time, it wasn't for money. It wasn't necessarily for the role. Exactly right. It was because of either the leadership or the company's values is really what just kind of, it was a distaste for them. And so that's why, when you're going through their development part of this, and we're going to talk about the culture in just a second, it's important you're kind of zeroing in on this, because again, if they're not leaving because they like what they do, and they're not leaving because they're not making enough money, that's the reason why they're leaving, then you better take a hard look at those things that are causing it, which is if they've got leadership that's not up to snuff, and or there's some cultural issues with the company and what their values are versus what the person that's leaving's values are.
Yeah, great.
Which is a good segue to the last part, which we talked about culture a little bit, and we can kind of wrap around this, which is the cultural part. And we mentioned this in the previous episode or in episode 3, but that's all around, what are the values that your organization needs to possess in order to get the best out of your team. And this is probably, this is in many cases led by the leader or established by the leader of the organization and what they are willing to reward versus not reward, right?
Yeah.
So I remember even when, you and I worked together at Tubular, right? It's like, I pretty much came in and said, I'm not going to tell you what you should do or what you should believe, but here is what's going to be rewarded. And here's the expectations of what we're going to try to accomplish to get to our mission, because our mission, we're part of a business, and our mission is to go out and grow this company and get us to some kind of successful outcome, whatever that happens to be, and hit our numbers and perform. It's about making sure we produce what we say, what we commit to produce, right? And so, and whether that was, hey, I remember when I would talk to the team or when I would first come in, I would say, we're going to transform the organization. We are going to be sales and marketing driven, customer focused, and organizationally disabled. Those are the primary tenets of the culture of this field organization here at Tubular. And here are the expectations that I have of each of you. One of them, I think a lot of people were kind of looking at me and scratching their heads. Like, I would use the term, if you remember, I'm going to expect that you sign up, be held accountable, go out and be responsible, take responsibility for whatever it is you're doing or not doing. And by the way, it's okay if you make a mistake. That's okay. I expect you to take risks, because I'm going to expect you to what I call fail forward. It's okay. If you miss on it, you fail, it's good. Fail forward. Don't go back to what you were doing before. Go try something different, right? So I think there's a big part that the leader has in kind of creating the framework of the culture. And then I was like, because I'm going to go out and hire really, really smart people and then enable them, and then I empower them. I was more of an empowering type. Then I'm going to let them and their teams figure out what are the idiosyncrasies and the nuances of this type of a sales and marketing driven culture and organization.
Yeah, it's great.
So,
like in that example, you were kind of upfront about what you expect or not, enroll or not. But in that example, you were coming into an organization. So it was good. You were giving people assurances about how things are going to be, and they could enroll.
Well, because I think if you set people's expectations, then they can either opt in or opt out, right? And which is what you're really trying to get, right? For those of you who want to be part of this, because this is what we collectively are going to be held accountable for. So I want I'm going to translate this to you as to how you're going to be collectively held accountable, each of you individually or as your teams or whatever it happens to be. And
that's great advice. I think I need to do that in the next role, whenever that will be. But
or even when you're, if you're coming in and or even when you're doing your kickoffs and things like that, Dennis, it's like, because you're going to have a mix of, there's some new people. If your company's growing, right, you're going to have new people. You're going to have some of your current people, You may be doing a little bit of a change in your strategy, whatever it happens to be, right? If everybody understands what their role is, what they're going to be responsible for or not, as the case may be, and what the expectation is around that, it's much easier for them to buy into being accountable. Whereas if they don't understand that, then it's a culture of lack of transparency, and it's you know what I mean? And it's a lack of trust, and you know what? They're probably not going to respect their leadership and things like that. So
great advice.
Yeah. So that's the reason why I did it. I'd be curious for you in your current role, how is culture evolving for you, or what are you finding is effective for you and your teams versus things that aren't necessarily landing?
I guess like something that I've done in my current role. So I've been in this role about 3 years now, and just like standards and what's good standards in terms of like selling, and like a big thing with sales I've always found is momentum. Like, I don't care how good you're at selling. If you have enough volume of pipeline and stuff, you are going to be successful, unless you're really, really bad at communication.
That's lousy conversion rate.
Yeah, exactly. So I think, you could be selling enterprise software where it's fewer targets, but if you're doing all the right things correctly, then I've said an analogy sometimes, if you're cutting down a tree and you're cutting the tree or hitting the tree in the correct manner all the time, it will eventually fall. It will. So I think what I've found culturally for a sales organization, to make sure that you have like just around the sales discipline and good teamwork, passion, momentum is very important to get like good results and everything, and having a fun environment I think is very important. And this trust piece that we talked about 2 episodes ago, where trust is very important in a sales team, which I think what you were saying, Pat, there is great about like being, I think I've been like up like with people coming to a new organization, it's like, this is who I am, these are my values, this is what I expect of people or not. But I think everything you've said there is something that I've seen work well. I think something that doesn't work well sometimes, like actually with Google right now, I have a lot of ex-colleagues at Google. Their culture has changed so much. Like in the past, they were always like, we are, what was it? Like, we're not evil, or whatever their slogan was. And as well, like,
do no evil or something like that.
Evil. Yeah, something crazy. But then as well, like a culture of like, feeding everyone at work, like safety, and it was very nice culture. Now they're having to like fire loads of people and stuff, and their culture is like going through crazy stuff. So I think as well, don't be afraid of like, at the end of the day, this is a business. I think you said this as well, like a business can't love, it can't like,
you want love, get a puppy.
If you want love, get a puppy. So I think also being like forthright, don't, what's the word? Mollycoddle? Is it like with people sometimes, like set realistic expectations, what's expected from them as well, to be successful in the organization. And then your good people, reward them, praise them, make great examples of them, and everyone else will like aspire culturally, I think, with that as well.
I like that. That's an excellent point, right? Reward, recognize is a really important thing for building confidence, and I would tell you the other thing, to kind of a compliment to that is be receptive to feedback about, how things are going or not going. Right? Back to my comment about don't think that you know everything, because if you are receptive to your feedback, whether you do something or don't do something, but at least you're open to hearing about it, because we're not always right, we're not always perfect. So and that usually helps other people to go, hey, I noticed this thing here, and maybe we should try this. And it's like, you know what, give it a rip, right? Type of thing. So
100%.
Very good point, Dennis.
Great.
All right. There you go. There's the effects of enablement and culture in terms of how do you improve the productivity.
Winning culture and sales enablement. So hopefully everyone's enjoyed this episode. And if you haven't already subscribed or follow Closing Time with Pat and Dennis, please do. And yeah, I think that's a wrap, is it, Pat?
I think so. And so, Dennis, the bar is closed. Take care.
Bye, everyone.